My name's Beckett.
My name's Jasper.
If you like this video, hit like, comment, subscribe. Join the Peanut Gallery.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Peanut Gallery, and we are here today with friends that we met a few weeks ago at our Elmer Ministerial. So us local pastors get together once a month, and we have some guest speakers that come out. And Miles and Jessica came out and talked to us about Planet Youth and the Icelandic model. And both Patrick and I were super intrigued, and so we were like, "Hey, you guys want to do a podcast and talk more?" So you guys said yes, and you're here. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and we're starting poorly. I showed up late. Sorry.
But we have coffee.
We have coffee.
I still have coffee.
So that is what it is. So why don't we start a little bit? Tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got involved in this. And then I know there's a bunch that will be listening that haven't heard of the Icelandic model or Planet Youth. I guess it goes by both names. We're going by Planet Youth. And so we'll talk about that in a bit, but kind of introduce who you guys are first.
So I'm Miles Prue. I work for Family and Children's Services, which is the child welfare agency in St. Thomas and serves all St. Thomas and Elgin. How I specifically kind of became involved in this is that I chair a group which is called CAN, which is the Community Action Network, which is a collective of agencies, service providers that work collaboratively to try and address issues and create well-being for youth and children in our community.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah. And I'm Jessica Austin with Southwestern Public Health. I'm a health promoter there that has worked in substance prevention for over 13 years now. And I am connected to the Community Action Network as well and have been working on upstream community level interventions that will help prevent substance use. So we, champion that kind of work at public health and trying to look at how we can treat society as the patient and move forward in a direction that, helps take off the pressure of treatment centers and things like that. So, yeah.
There's a lot in that one sentence. That was good. Upstream. No, it was good.
Yeah.
It was good. And the more you attend some of this, you start picking up on some lingo. So how does something like that get started? What is that? Because there's a lot of this stuff that I'm coming across that none of us have ever heard of. So what is that?
CAN has it's gone through a number of different titles, but it's been around for decades. And really it is a community of practitioners that work together specifically with children and youth, just trying to create wellness and address issues that can impact youth in our community. I know actually we're just coming up to a 10-year event. CAN was one of the agencies. They started a youth homelessness protocol. We have a really great homelessness protocol that we utilize for our youth in our community. It's coming up to its 10-year anniversary this year. That's one of the big accomplishments that they've done. It's been around in decades and really just service providers that work with children and youth recognizing that to make an impact, it requires the collective to work collaboratively to really address the issues that are impacting all of the children and youth we work with.
Okay. All right. So how do we get to the Icelandic model, Planet Youth? I'm going to get this right. Planet Youth.
Planet Youth.
I was directed. I know. Planet Youth. All right. How do we get to that?
So I'm just thinking back now. So I've chaired CAN, I think, for the last, it's almost been 4 years. Really, I started in the pandemic. And when I was working with the collective there, we had talked about there was obviously lots going on with the pandemic. Kids were kind of separated, not going to school. And one of the things we started talking about was the disruption to the connection for the kids that we had in our community. We had heard from this one speaker that I forget actually his name now, but he did an amazing, he ran a program about connecting with kids, about the importance of it. And we brought him to speak to a bunch of the schools while we were in the pandemic to talk still about how important connection is, the need for it in our lives, the well-being that it creates for all of us. Because we wanted to have a way to connect kids, bring wellness to the youth that we work with. So he presented this. We had a bunch of schools come up with different ideas of ways that they could create connection for themselves and the youth in their schools. And then building on that, the group was just talking about we feel like there's a struggle with how well kids are doing right now, and what are some ways that we can create wellness for the kids that we work with. And then being part of this, I spoke with Jessica as the health promoter, who talked a little bit about the Icelandic model of substance prevention. which I love because I do love that it's a substance prevention model,
Right.
but I love it. I don't just think of it as a substance prevention model. It's a model that looks at creating wellness and putting our kids in the best position to strive.
Right.
Yeah.
So then kind of connecting with Jessica, we just started talking. We presented to the group. Jessica talked a little bit about what this model is all about. People were really excited about the outcomes that they've had in Iceland over the last couple of decades and started talking about how do we present this to our community and maybe get this ingrained in our own community.
But I think, and I don't know the data around this. I know we'll talk about data in a bit, but I remember growing up and we just did say no to drugs. Like that was the big thing. And what I don't know if you guys have this, but what was the data on the success of what we've done? Because obviously, when we look around our community, I mean, St. Thomas is, you drive through the downtown, you see a lot of the impacts. You say London the same way. A lot of rurally, it's more hidden. So you may drive through Elmer and see nothing. But working through Family Central, you begin to realize it's still here. It may be more hidden in the rural areas, but is there a shift in the understanding of how we do this as a community? Is that part of the learning curve, or is it just that the world has changed so much that what we're facing now is so much different than what we were facing then?
I think from a data perspective, we can definitely see that the lag time in the data of the Just Say No campaigns has demonstrated that it was ineffective. That you look back at some of those pieces of individual choice versus the environment that the person was put into and what that can create when it comes to food insecurity, housing insecurity, violence and things like that can really impact the way that somebody lives and functions and the coping strategies that are put around that. And so to say to somebody that's facing all of those things, we'll just say no. Well, how does that function? Right. And as Miles had said, like it's taken decades to see the data come out of Iceland, and this is where all countries have kind of taken note to, is that they really looked at a different way of approaching as a community and finding the places within their communities that they needed to focus and concentrate on when it came to protective factors, things that would surround somebody with well-being. And how that can change, but it takes time for that kind of change. So, yeah, it took a good 10 years to be able to see the numbers start to go in the right direction, but they can see it. So that's the important piece, is that we know that now and we can kind of move in that direction.
Right. All right, so walk us through. We've mentioned it a few times. What happened in Iceland? Kind of how did that lead to this whole Planet Youth? Because that's pretty big already. Like it's I don't remember how many countries you guys said it was in, but it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
And we have a few places in Ontario that have started implementing it. You guys are working with it. But what happened in Iceland?
Yeah, so Iceland identified that they had a huge problem with youth drinking, and they were seeing youth, Iceland obviously being closer to the North Pole. They have times where they have no night, and so sunlight being out all around the clock. They had a youth out partying, streets filled with youth partying and drinking, and all of the ramifications that come with that, right? Sexual assaults and things like that would come from youth being out at all hours and drinking. And so they wanted to put this in place. They developed this really comprehensive survey to ask youth in their communities about the different areas of their lives that we know can impact their environment and their decisions on using substances. So that's where that came from.
Who starts this? Like, is this a government thing that started? Was it a grassroots thing?
It was the Icelandic Research Institute. I can't think of their formal name off the top of my head, but definitely a bunch of social researchers that came together to develop the survey, and they do all the analysis and they do all of that piece. But they actively engaged their municipalities and their politicians, and it's quite a dynamic group of community that has to come together. It's the faith-based institutions, it's your schools, it's your politicians. Everybody needs to come together to the table to look at those results and then say, what are my pieces of the pie that we can help move this in a direction? So that's what they did, is they brought together all these diverse groups of community members to one table to then look at the data and then find solutions that were within their reach. So the municipal governments could put funding towards recreation centers and divert where they were putting their money. And the sports coaches and the volunteers and the faith-based groups and all of that could put their, adult volunteers into a space where they were being positive role models for youth that needed other spaces to go and experience positive adult role models and things. So, yeah, it was the diversity of a community coming together from these researchers developing the survey and getting the data to start it off. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so data-driven. Because you guys don't have that on you. I should have told you to bring some stats, but what did they find? Because I feel like, especially the conversations we have right now, everybody's complaining about things that aren't going right, but it's hard to pinpoint what is actually happening. How come there are so many people that are ending up on the streets, ending up addicted to some of these incredibly terrible substances? Some of it's just downright scary as a parent, and you're going, my kid is going into that world. But do you know kind of what they found? What were some of the things that they were these are some of the triggers? And I know you talked about upstream, downstream, and maybe that's part of the conversation that maybe we can stick this into there. Because I just feel like a lot of people in our circles, that they feel lost. Yeah. I want to do something. I'd love to see change. But you drive through downtown London, one time, and you're just I don't know how to impact this.
Yeah. It's almost overwhelming, right?
There's a certain lostness. And so I think some of so what did they find? And then how do you, because I think at least, you almost get lost already. How do you bring people together? I live in Elmer. We are great at separation. We were awesome during the pandemic, right? And because we have different opinions. And so you polarize. How do you bring people together that are very polarized in some areas? You're not going to erase that. People always have opinions. How do you even start that? So I think there's a lot of layers to it. I feel like we look at the end result and we go, man, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Just to preface, to back up a little bit. So this started in the 90s that Iceland has started to implement this. So it's not something that just happened overnight. This has been decades in the making, where you can see the numbers have gradually shifted.
Right.
And I think it's part of it. There's so much lattice work that kind of goes on until there's not one thing that we can pinpoint that says, hey, this is what is leading kids to substance use. So there's so many different domains, which is where they started looking at. And the 4 domains are leisure time, what kids are doing in leisure time, their home life, so what's happening at home and caregiver relationships, their peer relationships, and then recreation.
School.
And then school. Sorry, those are the 4 domains that kind of they're looking at, and how they can impact those domains to kind of move things forward.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to throw more lingo at you. So upstream, downstream, risk.
Awesome. We're not very smart, but go ahead, just try.
risk, and protective factors. So the survey really looks at what are our risks, what are things that could be that we know in those domains that could be causing the problems, but also what protective factors that can buffer even if a youth experiences some of those risks. Do we have going for us, and that we could enhance? Because some things in our communities, and I grew up in Delhi, Cortland, so rural communities have really great networks and strengths to them when it comes to being able to, I grew up calling over the neighbor for some sugar, right? Those connections that can happen. But that if you don't look at both of those risks and protective factors to figure out what you can enhance, and when you enhance those protective factors, those risks kind of fall off the wayside, right? So if we can surround kids with more of the protective factors, and one of those things is even just spending time with your family. Yeah. And that's one of the things that Iceland saw, is that youth were spending time just out on the streets after 10 p.m. Now, I don't know, I lived in a rural area. If you're out after 10 p.m., we didn't have streetlights, so I don't really know. But if you are out after 10 p.m. and you're, a 14-year-old kid, what are you doing?
Right.
Probably nothing productive. And so just having those abilities for parents to have a social agreement or contract to say that I don't want my kid out after 10 p.m. I want my kid with me, spending time with me, was a protective factor that increased the likelihood that they would not use substances. So just gave them that buffer of you're probably not going to go out experimenting with things that you can get a hold of, because access is through peers and through older siblings or cousins and things like that. So that data really sets people, going into your comment about polarized people and decisions and ideas. When you have the data sitting in front of you and you have a common goal for the well-being of kids, I don't know how many people could say, no, not interested in the well-being of kids. If you're bringing people together that have a common goal of like, we care about our kids in our community and we want a healthy community, then we can look at the data and go, okay, we know that our kids are spending too much time on social media. What do we need to do as a community? And what are all the pieces that we can work together to get there? And then you can have those differing discussions about what that solution is. And it's going to be multifaceted. It's going to be lots of different things, layers of different things, from parents all the way to the politicians. What are we going to do? And I see in the States, like they're looking at, policies around cell phones, selling cell phones, access to cell phones in schools, things like that. So as an example, that would be something that you'd come together as a community. But yeah, rooting, we've definitely gotten the forum that the CAN committee pulled together, a lot of interest of very diverse groups of people coming together. Over 70 people, I think, attended the forum to say, we're interested. This is the start of us talking about well-being for kids. And so start there and get the data in front of us and go.
So how do we get the data? I know that's our biggest hurdle right now.
Yeah, this is something we've never seen in our region. Rural areas, when it comes to data, we're really left behind. We have provincial data, which is collected in all of our schools, but our schools locally, we have a very minimal participation rate. And so the representation in the data that's available to us is minimal, but that's all we have to go on right now. To get data costs money because it's a lot of work in getting all of those results analyzed and getting those collected. Planet Youth, which is the Icelandic researchers, is the branded contract that we can hire to get the survey that they've already had, tested. It's all of those fancy words, psychometrically sound and all of the other things, so that we can, that we can implement.
I like the way she just threw that out.
All those words that I
I'm saying I know them, I can pronounce them. Okay, we'll Google them.
Yeah, that we can move forward with having them, spearhead that piece, get us the results. You guys do all of the hard work when it comes to getting us the reports. And then we as a community will review those reports. So that contract costs our community money. So do you want to put money out, to prevent it? Or do we put it further down and see the end results of just constantly needing more and more resources in the treatment side? Right. And that's where you get that upstream, downstream balance. Right. Yeah.
Well, and I think you get lost at the downstream. When kids are already in peril and they're struggling, it's really hard to figure out all the resources to get them out of it. But then you spend the majority of your budget there because you can't not spend money there. Yeah. So I feel like that's probably one of the tensions that we're constantly battling with, right? Like, there is only so much money. People are only willing to give so much. That's the end of the day. There's limited resources. But so you mentioned the data, and you just kind of went over it, but we talked about this a bit more extensive at Ministerial. Why was there such limited participation in getting this data in our region? Because there was something sent out through the high schools, if I remember correctly. But for the most part, people just said no. Is that a unique thing that we need to battle in our region? Is that a lack of trust as government resource or agencies? Or is it just an apathy that people are like, that's big city stuff, who cares? Because that'll be the biggest challenge, right? You can't force people to fill this stuff out. And
Yeah.
And Jessica could probably speak a bit more to the data collection that occurred, but that is part of the work with implementing the Planet Youth model is a real big push, and this would take a community collective to get the word out there about how important that these surveys are, what we're going to utilize these surveys for, and then get everyone on board. Because really, what's the percentage rate of people that they want completing the surveys?
80% response rate,
which is quite
unheard
high.
of, right? Wow. When it comes to data collection, it's really hard. And I think that the challenges with that are, people need to know that you're going to do something meaningful with that data. Students need to know. I've heard from so many youth that are like, we are surveyed all the time. and they don't see the impact of it, right?
Right.
So we need to engage youth. We need to engage parents. And this is going to be community level data. This is for the community members to be able to prioritize what we need to do in a community to make it better for youth. And so it's very quick turnaround data, which has always been a problem before with all data, is you've got like a 2-year lag. So the data we have now is from 2019. That we oversampled.
And a lot has happened.
Right?
Right.
And so it's hard because by the time you get that back and then you put your plans in place and you try to do something, the world has shifted so much and life has shifted so much. So this cycle of collecting data, getting it back within 2 months of the collection and getting right feet on the ground, now we're doing stuff to make changes. And then they collect it again biannually. So, you got a year to get stuff going. You collect it again to see how are we doing, shift or tweak what you need to be doing, keep going. And that's how you slowly keep your eyes on the goal, but moving in the right direction. Right now, we kind of blindly look at it, the data and go, this is a problem. But by the time we get the next round of data, we're like, oh, we're gone this way.
Right.
And so we really need that cycle and that momentum to keep ourselves in that trend of, making a difference. So,
because I know with Family Central, a lot of it is we're just guessing because you just don't know and there isn't data. And so you're guessing. I know this is a need for some. How big the need is, we don't know. Are we reaching everybody we need to reach? I don't know because you literally have nothing to go on other than, well, we know some kids are struggling, so we'll try this. But it's such a guessing game. So to me, that was very intriguing how little data we had with that. But then with the student stuff, I'm like, even more. Because if your impact is going to aim to be long-term, where you're not just like, okay, well, it's not just saying no to drugs, it's also building a quality life. That's a big picture thing that you can't accomplish in an election cycle. You have to, this is going to have to be something people have to buy into kind of long-term to see some of those results.
Yes. Yeah. That's why it's a long process. That can be a little tough to get buy-in then too, right?
Right, 100%.
Because there's it's not necessarily that we're looking to see change tomorrow or next month or next year, but 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, this is really going to have an impact on our entire community. But I think to make these changes, those are the shifts that you have to make.
Right.
Yeah.
So where are we now with
next steps?
Yeah. Where are we heading? I know the data stuff, but even in terms of cost, what are we looking? What do we need? Because it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. You need the data to get the grants. And so there's a lot of that if we had all the data to say we have X amount of kids that can't do this or that, you could qualify for a bunch of grants.
Yeah.
But you don't have it, right? So you're a little bit trapped here without this data, it feels like.
I think this is the one thing though, to take a step back, I sit on a ton of different committees. There's challenges in so many different areas. I think there's always been challenges.
Right.
One of the things though that they talk about a lot of the groups that we're working with is, we need more resources for say housing. We need more resources for food security. You realize when you start to sit at these tables that we're never going to be able to just resource our way out of this. We need to start thinking about this in a different manner, which is kind of moving more to the root cause of things.
Right.
So that's we need to get our community on board saying we're just never going to be able to resource our way out of this. How are we going to kind of move this forward?
And knowing that the protective factors that we'll be making, priorities within our community will help those that are living in peril right now, right? When you start building a safer community that, I think about some of the things that would come out of that, even an individual that is living with a substance use disorder would benefit from that, right? That they could also see that there's caring adults that are there to support them and that we can, have those trainings that help support people in their understanding and, create that way of living that shifts the way that our community takes care of each other. And so that helps everybody. It helps prevent it for the future, but it also helps those living right now too. So we have to help with knowledge translation right now in our community, getting people aware about what we're trying to do, because it really will shift the way that we're living and the way that we fund things and the way that we plan things. And moving forward as a coalition, we're trying to help people like yourself
Right.
get more knowledgeable about it so that you can share it within your networks and parents sharing it within their parent groups and things like that so that
we are the biggest podcast in Mount Salem.
right? It's
At least on this side of the town. I was intrigued by what you said, Miles, and so I would like to dig a little bit. What would you like to see in the community? Like when you talk about community engagement stuff, because I totally agree, and I have some ideas of where I think you're going with it, but I'm curious what you're kind of seeing. How do people get more involved, or what are some of the steps that you feel like have changed over the last 15 years that people aren't doing what they used to do, or some of that stuff?
I think in terms of like just service workers doing the work, I think people are getting burnt out. There's so much required of them. So people are doing stuff a lot off the side of their desk. This isn't necessarily a role within their job, and people are just getting burnt out. So I think changing the way that we do things, where you see the impact that you're having and some new ways, I think will start to inspire people and get a bit more momentum and energy for the community. So that's one thing I think that we need to start. I think that will help us kind of move things forward.
Do you think as agencies have gotten more engaged, that people have kind of been one of these, like it's now your job to fix the youth, and we just kind of sit back, like we pay taxes, we do our thing. Like, do you feel like there's a lot of that disengagement? Because I know for us, at least when we started doing these interviews, I didn't even know what the Kinsmen and half those people did.
Right.
Like I had no idea how much stuff was volunteer driven in our community until you start. But I feel like that's a pretty significant thing where we're like, well, we pay a government to do this. Like we have workers, so she's going to take care of the kids, and you're going to take care of kids, and we're good. Do you feel like there's a lot of that? Because I feel like some of the burnout, I don't know, does it come from some of that as well?
I think so. And this is the thing, the government just doesn't fund all the things that we need support with. We do need the community to back this up and community people to become part of this. So I can think just if, for example, food security, we have tons of food banks that are all over. I don't know if people know, almost none of them are government subsidized. They're all from local volunteers that are doing this of their own time, collecting their own donations, because they see the need that's in the community. Right. And this is what we are going to need. This is not going to be resolved from a bunch of agencies coming together because they're all working to the max ability that they can. This is about our communities coming together and taking responsibility for the future that we want to have for ourselves and for our children.
Okay.
And I don't think you really want the government to just see the data and say, this is what we're going to do in our community. For myself, part of my biggest role is to engage the community and say, here's our reports. What do we see as feasible in our community? What do we want to prioritize? And make that happen. Because, I think we've experienced, like, we don't want to just be told, this is what you're going to do in your community. We want to engage community members.
We always listen to the government.
Right?
We have no issue. No, I think, and I think you even saying Southwest Public Health, I think I'm assuming that's still an issue for you guys going out because everything is now tied to the pandemic.
Yeah.
Everything is that. And so I know in our rural community, both the agencies that you guys work for are somewhat mistrusted. And that's not a personal thing. It's just it is what it is. My heritage does not trust the government, period. So there's a lot of those things. But to me, I was just surprised. I think rurally, you see a lot of that community stuff that you talked about happen. But I can see it in the bigger cities. You kind of get lost in that. Like, so volunteerism is down all over the place. There's a lot of that stuff. But post-pandemic, I do think it's interesting. A lot of the data coming out now is that people are actually further engaged in their community because the pandemic showed them how much they needed to be. Yeah. So I do think there's some bright lights coming out of that. Okay, so back to next steps, just because I want to make sure we clear on this. So you guys we're applying for some grants to try to get funding for that. Is there other next steps that...
So we're working with our school boards. We also want to, like we've talked about, engaging with beyond Thames Valley and the London District. We have homeschooling networks. We have private school networks. And how do we make sure that all the youth from all of those schools are engaged and those families are engaged? So we do want to make sure that when we start talking about surveying and collecting locally, that's going to be available to whatever schools, whatever community parents that want their youth to be surveyed. So we have to figure out those logistics and get those connections and to make sure that those conversations happen so that we know how much money we need with this contract with Planet Youth to say we're going to have this many youth in our region surveyed approximately. And to move forward with that, we then need to get the money to have that contract. So I think first and foremost is that we need to make sure that we have those community conversations to see how many youth are we talking about here? How many families are interested in this? How many parents are like, yep, this makes sense to us, and move forward.
Who all falls into this bracket? Because your region, our region covers from what to what?
Yeah, so right now the coalition that has started is an Elgin-based coalition. So it's agencies and community partners and parents and that from Elgin, St. Thomas. Southwest Public Health region includes Oxford and Elgin. Oxford is looking at their own capacities and what that looks like. Elgin decided to move forward with our own separate kind of entity. So that's when I say region. Not Southwest Public Health, but the Elgin Coalition. So,
if people want to learn more, then Patrick's holding up signs there because he doesn't have a mic. Okay, we're at 30. Is that what that said? Perfect. If they want to learn more, like I know there's a website, but can they reach out to you guys?
Yeah.
Or how do we get connected further?
Yeah, so Miles, as chair of the CAN table, the CAN table is a great resource in the community, and they have their own website. Southwest Public Health has created a landing page for this work as of now. It might shift into its own page if there was funding and resourcing and all of that for it to be its own separate page. But right now, you can go on Southwest Public Health under Community Substance Prevention, and all of the information's there. Again, connect with either of us for sure.
Okay. Yeah, she said a website.
Yeah, you can go to our website. Back to like the three things that we're trying to do, right? One is getting the school boards on board so that we can implement the surveys because they have to be done in schools. So you have to have the schools.
What age group are you looking for? Is it just high schools or is it all?
It's grade 9 or 10.
Most of the communities do survey grade 10.
Okay.
Grade 10 students. But as a community coalition, you would decide, do you want to do grade 9s and 10s? We have very limited numbers in some of our high schools when it comes to the grade 9 classes. So you might want to lump them and have grade 9s and 10s together or grade 10s and 11s. So that group has to decide how many students are we surveying and what grade. But yeah.
Yeah, so we want the schools on board. We want to build a bit of a coalition table that is going to oversee things and help move things forward, that will take some of the initiatives that might come out of the data. And we want this to be a mix of community people, organizations, because I think that's what helps to make this swell and move things kind of forward. So we did host that community forum where we had about 80 people come out to it. We're hosting meetings right now, though. It's generally agency partners and leads from specific agencies that are coming out to those, but we love more community support with that. In May, we're looking to host kind of an education session on a bit more what the Icelandic model is, how people can learn a bit more so that they can take that information and then start talking about it in their own circles and groups. I don't think we have a set date yet for that. No. And then the final thing is signing on a contract with Planet Youth. Because once we sign on this contract with Planet, you got to sign on with the initial contract. Because then we're eligible for the other funding that the federal government is going to allocate, which we can apply for, that will allow us to have the funding to run these programs for like 5 years.
If there are people who want to give towards this, is that an option?
Yep. So we've had like one of the Rotary clubs, I know they're pretty passionate about substance use prevention in the community, and they've already had some fundraising events that they've donated $500 to us. We don't specifically have things, obviously, that we're trying to implement yet because that we would have to get started and then get the data. And that's when we're going to need a bit more funding or decide where we're going to invest our money to give us the best bang for our buck to kind of move things forward or whatever we want to create to support kids.
Do you have a loose number-ish what we need financially to get this thing going? Like, what are we looking at?
About $30,000.
That's it?
That's it.
That's to sign the initial contract, which I think
the data collection is more.
I think we can get that.
See, this is why you read the fine print. All right.
Yes.
What would data collection be like? Just because I know this is something, I just know with Family Central, how much kids and substances and the mental health piece has impacted families. And there are a lot of people who are like, if there's something I can do or give, I want to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, what kind of number are we looking at? Do you know? Or is it vague because we don't know how many kids are involved? Or
Yeah, there's some logistics there of like, but the general kind of range would be about 65,000 for the data collection.
Okay.
And so looking at that 65 to 70,000 is like to get a report for all of Elgin, or if you want to break it down to like East Elgin versus West Elgin versus St. Thomas, it might go up because there's more work into pulling data out from different schools that way. But our community might say we really value that because East is so much different than West, or St. Thomas is so much different than the outlying areas. So we have to have those conversations, but roughly around that. I think originally I was like, if we could just raise $100,000, we'll be somewhere in the right direction, right? Okay. And making sure that we can get that for our region.
That's why I'd love to get some federal grants where we can utilize that for the data collection and the cost with that. And then if we need to raise funds for other initiatives that come out of where we want to go as a community, there'll be other costs kind of for what we want to build. But that might have things that have costs to it. It might have things where we change the way kind of our groups run or our organizations or new things that come to the forefront about community people that might want to set something up because we say, hey, this is an area of need or this is something that's really going to move the needle.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that came out of an existing community that's been doing this, like they were the first to initiate Planet Youth in Ontario. Lanark County just got back their survey results. They did it during the pandemic and still got a 75% response rate, which kind of blew my mind because students weren't even in school really. But
well done, Lanark.
Yeah, again, there was some learning there. But sleep came out as one of their primary risk factors. Is that a lot of their youth that were using substances were not getting enough sleep, and so they're really working with the Sleep Institute up in Ottawa now and. Really coming up with some good strategies for their community. They're working with their school boards on a later start time for high schools based on like student biology and things like that and being able to get up later. And so I think that the resources that would come out of that might even be things that we've never even thought about as a community to resource. You think about sleep, like who's working on sleep in our community? And what is there to do around sleep? We don't have those answers, but if we get data that says something that another community has, we can also learn from them and adapt and do things in our community too. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, human beings are so unbelievably complex. I think often you try to simplify it, just say no. I think that's why I've often thought about that. I'm like, if only life were that easy where you could just be like, this is right, this is wrong. But the complexities of the situations kids grow up in and circumstances and your own mental health and all that, like there's so much to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anything else that you feel like I should have asked that you would have liked to be asked? Stories you want to tell? I don't know if you guys noticed, but Miles looks really nice. So
yeah.
Thank you. It's amazing what a sports jacket can do to an outfit.
I walked into the office and I was like, wow, we did not prepare the same way this morning. All right, good.
No, I just encourage people to go out and explore a little bit about the Icelandic model. I don't know, just listening to it, I really became passionate about, this is something that's unique. It's a different way to do things. The way things are going right now, I feel like we need to change kind of our initiatives and our efforts. So I think that starts with people just exploring a bit of that, seeing what they think for themselves, considering, what's the future. I'm a parent, so I have 8 and 10-year-old girls. We're just considering, what the environments in the world I want to have look like for them down the road has become really important. And I think the more that people can kind of check this out, the more they might be on board and see how relevant this is.
Absolutely.
I'll butcher the quote, so I'll just give you a little bit more of where my mind always goes when I think about this work, because it just gives me the visual, and it's spring, so it makes sense to say this. The adage is that when we plant a flower and it does not bloom, we look at changing the environment that it grows. We water the soil. We add fertilizer. We do things. We don't just look at the flower and go, flower, you're supposed to bloom, right? We need to look at our youth the same way. What is the environment that is feeding them to grow healthy and strong? to bloom and to flourish. And so I always think about that and just strive that we can do that. I do that with my own children too. What is happening in our environment that I can have control over in that and shift. So,
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you so much for your time. I hope over the next couple of years we'll connect lots because we're a big fan of this model. Patrick and I have done a good amount of looking into it, and it lines up with a lot of our vision for the community. And so I'm really excited about that. But yeah, thanks for the time. Appreciate it. And the grace to let me be late. We will post a couple links to their websites, but also to some of the Planet Youth stuff. And so highly encourage. I think the more you learn about things that are working, I think the more positive you look at your own community. There is hope. There's lots of good things happening around the world. And so I like what you said, stay curious, and let's see where we can go. Thanks again. See you soon.